Now, time for MediaWatch with Emma James. We're starting with a look at the reactions to President Trump's bruising political defeat. That's, of course, to Trumpcare.
Yes, absolutely. You could say that Trumpcare failed before anyone even had the chance to vote on it. Paul Ryan has said this isn't the end of the story, but whether this legislation ever comes back in a slightly moderated, tweaked form or not, undoubtedly this is a huge blow to the Trump presidency and, of course, the president's ego. Headlines like this, Trumpcare dead in the Huffington Post, exactly what he didn't ever want to see. In fact, he never wanted it to be referred to as Trumpcare. It is, of course, officially the American Health Care Act, and I think some people tried to call it the Ryan Care Act, but Trumpcare, it certainly seems to have been dubbed tonight, I think slightly gleefully, some people using that term perhaps just to annoy Donald Trump. Elsewhere on the Huffington Post website, there's this opinion piece from Howard Feynman, which says that, Donald, you are not in Manhattan anymore. In Washington, the construction company doesn't work for you, he says. Now, this article talks about the fact that if this was the art of the deal in action, of course, Donald Trump's very famous book, then Donald Trump needs to write a new one, frankly. In his first and therefore crucial foray into presidential negotiating, the Prince of New York real estate failed miserably. And they basically say that it's because he's never really faced anything like this in his life, because it is a very different world to buying and building, as most people would appreciate. But Donald Trump seemed to think that he could bring business to politics, and so far this has proven that it's not working terribly well. Ted Lieu, the congressman, said, "I love irony. Art of the deal, real Donald Trump became the greatest validator of Obamacare. He was unable to come up with a better plan." We'll have to, of course, wait and see what happens in the future. Now, Donald Trump has reacted to this, not on Twitter as of yet, but he has spoken to the New York Times on the telephone shortly after the news came out that this was not going to be voted on and that it wasn't going to be voted on in the foreseeable future. And what he said then was that the best thing that could happen is actually what happened. Watch. So he's tried to spin this as a big success in some way. He's blamed the Democrats, as you might expect, and he's also predicted that they will seek a deal within a year after Obamacare explodes because of high premiums. Of course, we will have to wait and see. Paul Ryan, when he gave his press conference, said, "We were a 10-year opposition party where being against things was easy to do. You just had to be against it." This, of course, is the difficulty with being in power.
Yeah, and Paul Ryan saying a lot more dejected than Donald Trump was. But on the other side of the aisle, there is some celebrating.
Absolutely. As you might expect, the Democrats are very, very happy with this indeed. And not least because, of course, there are 237 Republicans in the House of Representatives. They only needed 216 to go with it, to win, and they weren't going to get it. So a lot of critics feeling very smug. The Washington Post points out that a lot of Democrats just can't stop happy tweeting about the failed healthcare bill. And we've got people like Bernie Sanders saying the defeat of the disastrous Trump-Ryan healthcare bill is a major victory for working families and everyone who stood up in opposition. Elsewhere, we've got this, Brenda Lawrence, Republican Trumpcare bill pulled, and scenes of celebration there. And my favourite one, hey Republicans, don't worry, that burn is covered under the Affordable Care Act.
Meanwhile, in other news, French far-right leader Marine Le Pen visited Russia. That visit drawing a lot of attention. What are people making of it?
Yes, well, it very much depends on whether or not you like Marine Le Pen and her National Front message. Certainly, this Twitter user, who is a big fan, says Marine Le Pen and Vladimir Putin, the two pillars of a Europe of nations. Not a view shared by a lot of people. It has, of course, caused a great deal of controversy, not least because of Russia's supposed meddling in the American elections, and people fear that that's going to happen in France too. Looking at the coverage in Sputnik, which is, of course, a state-run, very much a mouthpiece for the Kremlin, if you like. And they have plenty of coverage of Marine Le Pen's visit. You would be forgiven, really, for thinking in this image that she's already made it into the Elysee Palace, because this kind of honour, meeting President Putin, is normally only reserved for foreign heads of state or government. And, of course, she isn't there yet. She's just a lowly MEP. So it is very unusual. And now, although Sputnik are talking a lot about it, it is interesting to note that on their homepage, there is no reference to Marine Le Pen's visit whatsoever. And perhaps this gives us an indication of just how important it really is to Russia. Maybe it's more about provoking trouble and being a bit cheeky rather than actually genuinely wanting to know what Marine Le Pen has to say to the Russian president. Even on the French language site, although they have a story about Marine Le Pen supposedly being on top of the latest polls in the first round, at least, of the presidential election, although that's actually been updated now. IFOP have come out saying no, Emmanuel Macron is ahead in that first round. They've got that story, but they've got nothing at all about her visit on their homepage. The story exists, but it's not that prominent, which I think is quite interesting to note. And it does start to look a little bit like this was basically just a photo opportunity for Marine Le Pen. Some really rather
presidential.
Absolutely, and some really striking photos coming out of it without question. And it is interesting to see her in that kind of role. Now, The Guardian's Sean Walker has been taking a look at this. He definitely thinks that Putin is really being a bit cheeky with this one. He says he's welcomed Le Pen with a nudge and a wink. And he talks about the expression in this photo really saying it all. He talks about it being basically a knowing smirk of epic proportions, he refers to it as. He points out that Putin saying that Russia doesn't want to influence events in any way sounded pretty ungenuine, frankly, because of the timing of this visit. It's less than a month now, almost exactly a month, until that first round of the presidential elections. And the fact that he's doing this, it does look more and more like a provocation. He also reports that Life News, which is another Russian news site, very much a state mouthpiece, they actually tweeted an opinion column with the tag, "Russia will help Le Pen win." That was very swiftly deleted a few minutes later. But of course, as is the way with the internet, things generally don't get deleted before somebody can take a screen grab, and there you have Moscow will help Le Pen to win the election. The image of Marine there, the National Front leader, and this Twitter user says the only campaign poster Emmanuel Macron will ever need, thanks to the pro-Kremlin Life News. Emmanuel Macron, of course, looking at the moment as though he will be her opposition in that second round of the presidential election.
Every time this campaign has a twist, you just can't believe it. It gets more and more interesting. That's it for now from the Media Watch with Emma James.